For more than 200 years, textbooks told a simple story about the potato. Ancient farmers in the Andes found a wild plant. They domesticated it. Thousands of years later, it spread across the world. But in 2025, scientists stopped looking at what humans did to the potato and started looking at what the potato actually is. What the DNA revealed had nothing to do with farming, nothing to do with any human decision ever made. The potato began 9 million years ago with a genetic collision between two plants that had no business meeting each other. And when historians finally understood what the DNA was showing them, they had to rewrite the beginning of the entire story. Chapter 1. What we thought. The story we taught for 200 years was clean and simple. Ancient people in what is now southern Peru began cultivating wild tubers around 10,000 years ago near Lake Titicaca. They selected the least bitter plants, replanted them, and shaped the wild mountain root into something worth eating. The Inca Empire adopted it and fed a civilization of 12 million people across 4,000 kilometers of South America with it. They invented chuño, freeze-dried potatoes that lasted years without refrigeration, survival technology millennia ahead of its time. Then the Spanish arrived, dismantled the Inca Empire, and brought the potato back to Europe around 1570. Europe reacted with fear. It belonged to the nightshade family, grew underground, and looked like nothing they knew. They called it the devil's apple. It took over a century for them to accept it. When they did, the transformation was absolute. A potato yielded 3 times the calories per acre of grain on land too poor for wheat. Ireland's population exploded from 2 million people in 1700 to over 8 million by the 1840s, almost entirely because of the potato. Then a water mold destroyed the harvest. 1 million people starved. 2 million fled. The cities of Boston and New York were forever shaped by that flood of Irish refugees. That was the story. A clean line from Andean farm to European table. Nobody had stopped to ask, where did the potato itself actually come from biologically? What is it at the level of DNA? They were missing 9 million years of history. Chapter 2. The DNA Discovery. 2025, an international team led by Sanwen Huang assembled one of the largest genomic datasets ever compiled for the potato, covering cultivated varieties and dozens of wild relatives, including rare specimens collected from isolated Andean valleys. When they ran phylogenetic analysis, tracing genetic family trees, they found a contradiction. Depending on which genetic markers they examined, the potato appeared most closely related to 2 completely different plants: the obscure tuberous tuberosum plant from remote Chilean rainforests and the tomato, both simultaneously. That kind of contradictory signal in genomic analysis is characteristic of ancient hybridization between 2 separate lineages. Here is what the data revealed. 14 million years ago, the common ancestor of tomatoes and tuberosums existed in South America. Then it split into 2 separate lineages that evolved apart for millions of years. Then the Andes began rising rapidly, reshuffling ecosystems and pushing plants into contact that had never met before. 9 million years ago, an ancient tuberosum relative and an ancient tomato relative ended up growing side by side. Since both plant groups are insect-pollinated, the cross could plausibly have happened through a pollinator moving between them, though the exact mechanism remains an inference, not a documented event. What the genomic evidence does confirm is that the hybridization happened, and that it gave rise to the entire potato lineage. But what the 2 plants contributed was the critical detail. The tomato side provided a gene called SP6A, a master switch that tells a plant to redirect energy underground and begin forming tubers. The tuberosum side provided a gene called IT1, which controlled the growth of the underground stems that would become the starchy storage organs we eat today. Without both genes arriving together in the same hybrid plant, tubers never form. The potato never exists. Chapter 3. Why tubers were revolutionary. A tuber is not a root, it is an invention. When the first hybrid potato formed its earliest tubers 9 million years ago, it was solving a problem. The Andes were rising. The climate was getting colder. Seasons were becoming unpredictable. Plants that completed their entire life cycle above ground were vulnerable. One bad frost and an entire lineage could vanish. The tuber changed the calculation. Instead of trusting the above-ground cycle, the potato plant redirected surplus energy underground into a swelling, starch-packed storage organ. When winter hit, the above-ground plant could die completely. The tuber waited in the soil, insulated, preserved, packed with enough stored energy to rebuild the entire plant the following season. Not from seed, not from pollination, from itself. This is why Andean farmers could grow potatoes at 4,000 meters elevation, where almost no other food crop survived. This is why the Inca Empire could store food for years using chuño. This is why, when the Irish depended on a single variety and disease struck, there was nothing left. The same property that made the potato unstoppable in the Andes made monoculture catastrophic in Ireland. All of it, empires, famines, population explosions, traces back to two genes combining by chance millions of years before a single human being existed. Chapter 4. Humans enter the story much later. Here is the timeline that historians struggled to absorb. The potato's biological origin, 9 million years ago. The first human beings on Earth, roughly 300,000 years ago. First evidence of humans eating wild potatoes, around 13,000 years ago. First deliberate cultivation, 8 to 10,000 years ago. For the overwhelming majority of the potato's existence, there were no humans anywhere on Earth. The tuber was already ancient before our species existed. And when humans finally did encounter wild potatoes, they were largely inedible. The same compounds that protected tubers from grazing animals, glycoalkaloids, made them bitter and toxic. The process of domestication was not a single breakthrough. It was thousands of years of trial, selection, and accumulated knowledge. The solution Andean farmers found was extraordinary. They began eating clay alongside wild potatoes. Clay minerals bind to the toxins in the digestive tract, neutralizing them. They did not know the biochemistry. They knew it worked. This practice survived into the present day in some Andean communities, unbroken for thousands of years. New genetic analysis confirmed that all cultivated potatoes on Earth, every variety, every fry, every chip, trace back to a single domestication event. One community, in one region, at one point in history, made the choices that changed the world. But they were working with raw material 9 million years in the making. Chapter 5. Why historians were shocked. The 2025 discovery did not just answer an old question, it broke an assumption. The assumption was this: the history of a crop begins when humans first touched it. Historians and archaeologists had spent decades debating which valley, which century, which wild ancestor. They were mapping the final 10,000 years of a 9 million year story. They were reading the last chapter of a book whose first chapters no one knew existed. The DNA also reframed something more uncomfortable about how we tell history. For centuries, the potato story was a story of human mastery. Farmers discovered a wild plant and shaped it. Conquistadors transported it. Europeans transformed their continent with it. Humans were the agents. The potato was the object. The genome says something different. The potato made itself, a hybridization event, a chance encounter in a rising mountain range, two genes arriving together for the first time. The tuber spent millions of years diversifying across the Andes, developing frost resistance, survival mechanisms, and biological resilience that no human engineer designed. When humans finally arrived, they did not create the potato. They found it. They selected from what was already there. And the stakes go beyond history. Understanding how the potato's key genes originated opens doors for breeders, particularly the question of how to introduce more genetic diversity into a crop that currently reproduces as near-identical clones, vulnerable to the kind of single disease collapse that caused the Irish famine. The same genetic lineage from 9 million years ago may protect the crop from the next crisis. We built our entire food system on a foundation we did not understand. We told the story of the potato for 200 years without knowing the first 9 million years of that story. The potato was not waiting for us. We were waiting for the potato, and nature had been running that story the whole time.